We're talking Celtic tribes, a global empire, the Sun King, the guillotine. You see, the story of France, it's not just a history, it's a story that basically shaped the world we live in today. So we're going to explore how this one nation ended up influencing everything from our laws to our ideas of liberty. And this quote really hits the nail on the head. We're not just talking about the history of one place. No way. This is a story that's packed with drama, revolution, and an influence that you can still feel in pretty much every corner of the globe. I mean, we're talking about massive triumphs and, yeah, some really devastating conflicts. All right, so how are we going to cover 2,000 years of history? Well, here's the game plan. We're starting way back with the Roman conquest. Then we'll jump forward to meet the legendary Charlemagne. After that, hold on tight, because we're diving into the fires of revolution, and finally, we'll see how the France we know today was forged. Let's get into it. Okay, first stop on our journey, we have to go back to a time before France even existed. We're talking about a land of ancient tribes. This is where the very first seeds of a future kingdom were planted. So, before you had any French kings, this whole area was known as Gaul. It was home to a bunch of Celtic tribes. Then, in 51 BC, Julius Caesar shows up, conquers the place, and suddenly Gaul is part of the Roman Empire. And this is a huge deal. You get this mix of Roman law, their language, their culture, and that fusion is really the first major ingredient in the recipe for what would eventually become France. So what happens when a superpower like Rome collapses? Well, you get a massive power vacuum, right? And that's when a Germanic tribe, the Franks, just seize the opportunity. Their leader, a guy named Clovis, creates the very first Frankish kingdom. But the real superstar of this era? Oh, that's gotta be Charlemagne. This guy builds an empire so huge, it unites most of Western Europe, something nobody had done since the Romans. It's no wonder they still call him the father of Europe. Okay, so you have a kingdom, but a kingdom isn't the same as a nation. To get a nation, you need a shared identity, a sense of us. And for France, that identity was going to be forged in fire, literally in the crucible of a war that lasted for over 100 years. So the Hundred Years' War, this was way more than just a squabble over some land. This was a battle for the very soul of France. See, the English kings were claiming they had a right to the French throne. They basically wanted to swallow France whole. So for the French, this wasn't just a war, it was a fight for their very existence. And let me tell you, this was not a short conflict. It raged on for more than a century. We're talking 116 years of just brutal, relentless warfare that shaped entire generations. And for a long time, it looked really bad for France. England was pushing deeper and deeper. It honestly seemed like all was lost. But then, an unlikely hero steps onto the scene. And who was this hero? Joan of Arc, a teenage girl, a peasant, who said she was guided by God. And you know what? She rallied the French army when they were at their lowest point, completely turned the tide of the war, and became this incredible, lasting symbol of French courage and identity. What a story. All right, so with this new national identity finally locked in, France enters a new phase, and by the 1600s, it hits the absolute peak of royal power. We're talking absolute monarchy at its most, well, absolute. But as we all know, the higher you climb, the harder you can fall. 72 years. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how long Louis XIV, the Sun King, was on the throne. That kind of stability is just unheard of, and it let him centralize power in a way nobody had ever seen before. He became the living, breathing symbol of absolute monarchy. And under his rule, France wasn't just a military power, it was the undisputed center of European culture, art, fashion, everything. And Louis knew that power wasn't just about armies, it was about showing off. And boy, did he show off. He built the Palace of Versailles, an absolutely breathtaking, jaw-dropping symbol of his total control. But here's the thing. This golden age, it was golden for a very, very small number of people. While the king and his court were living in this insane luxury, it was the common people who were footing the bill. This whole glittering palace was built on a foundation that was ready to crack. And you could feel it. A storm was brewing. And that storm had a name. The French Revolution. An event so massive, so world-shaking, that it didn't just change France. It changed everything. So in 1789, the people had had enough. They rose up, and they were fueled by these ideas that sound simple to us now, but were totally radical back then. Freedom, equality, human rights. And this wasn't just some protest. No, this was a full-on assault on the entire system of kings and nobles that had been running Europe for 1,000 years. And you just couldn't keep ideas like that bottled up in one country. They spread like wildfire. They became the inspiration for freedom movements all across the globe, from Latin America to Eastern Europe. They fundamentally changed the whole conversation about who gets to have power and why. Now, out of all this revolutionary chaos, one man emerges and just takes over everything: Napoleon Bonaparte. And to bring some order back, he creates something that would outlast all of his military victories: the Napoleonic Code. This new set of laws just wiped the slate clean of all the old, confusing feudal rules. Instead, it introduced ideas like equality before the law and getting ahead based on your talent, not your birth. It literally became the blueprint for modern law in dozens of countries. I mean, his rise to power was just unbelievable. He starts out as a nobody, a soldier, but through pure military genius and just relentless ambition, he climbs all the way to the top, crowns himself Emperor of France, and for a good while there, he was pretty much the master of all of Europe. All right, so let's get to our final chapter. We're going to look at how France dealt with building a massive colonial empire, the absolute trauma of 2 world wars, and how it all led to the country we see today. So during the 19th and 20th centuries, France goes on to build this huge colonial empire. At its peak, it was the second largest in the world, right behind the British. They had territories all over Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, you name it. And this created a really complex and, let's be honest, often brutal legacy that still has a huge impact on world politics. Then came the 20th century, which was just devastating for France. In World War I, it was one of the main battlegrounds. The losses were just horrific. And then, in World War II, it suffered the humiliation of being occupied by Germany. But even then, the nation's spirit never died thanks to the incredibly brave fighters of the French resistance who fought on until the country was finally liberated. So you think about this whole journey, from a Roman province to a revolutionary republic to a global empire, and finally a modern nation. Through all that turmoil, France has emerged as a major player on the world stage. I mean, it's a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and of course, a global leader when it comes to culture, fashion, and amazing food. And that brings us right up to today. When you look back, the story of France is really a story of constant change, of reinvention. And a lot of the time, that change was pretty violent. It really makes you wonder, right? In a world that's facing all new kinds of challenges, what's the next chapter going to be for the nation that gave us revolution? What role will it play next? Anyway, thanks for diving into all this history with me.